Hey guys, it's Mr. Schmidt here, and in this last video for Unit 9, we're going to talk about the other major market structure in factor markets, and that's a monopsony. So, like its relative, the monopoly in the product market, in a monopsony, there's only one firm hiring workers. That's it. Workers are relatively immobile, which means it's very difficult for a worker to just get up and go find that job somewhere else. And that's really essential because if workers can just move wherever they want relatively quickly and find work somewhere else, it's harder for the monopsony to maintain its market power or control over hiring workers. Third, the firm is a wage maker. So, unlike in perfect competitive labor firms where the worker's a wage taker, the firm gets to decide what the wage is, and then the worker's just stuck with it, right? So the firm gets to dictate what the wage is. The firm doesn't have to accept what the worker's accepting in the market because the market basically says, okay, firm, you have to basically pay $10. That's what we're saying it's going to be. In a monopsony, the firm can say whatever they want the wage to be, right? One assumption we're going to make here is that the firm cannot wage discriminate, which means the firm has to pay everyone the same wage. Now, they can decide what they want that to be. They have flexibility to do whatever they want because they are the market, but they can't charge two different workers two different wages. That's the assumption we're going to make here. Now, we're going to draw the graph in just a second, but when we draw the graph, you're going to see that the monopsonist marginal resource cost curve doesn't equal its supply curve like it does in perfect competition. Why is that? Well, it's because the monopsonist can't wage discriminate. That's what we're assuming here. And because it can't wage discriminate, it has to increase the wage for all workers to hire the next worker, right? If Bob is willing to work for $10, but Sue wants $12, the company has to pay both Sue and Bob the $12. And that's why marginal resource cost is actually going to be greater than the supply curve. And we're going to see that in just a second. So let's go ahead with that in mind and draw the graph. The good news is, first of all, there's no side-by-side, remember, because the market is the firm. There's only one firm hiring workers. Q is still going to be the x-axis label for quantity of labor, and W for the wage rate. Now, in terms of drawing this, I'm going to go ahead and start with the one that's the most recognizable because it doesn't look any different than it did in perfect competition. That's marginal revenue product. Still looks the way it does, and it is still going to be the demand curve. So there you go, marginal revenue product. Now for marginal resource cost and supply, it's going to look a little funky, but so it's going to look like this. So you have one line coming down, and then it makes a weird looking kind of a V shape like this. And that is going to be marginal resource cost and supply. And the funny thing about this graph is that if you flip it upside down, it's a monopoly. Like, do yourself a favor, like draw this graph and then underneath it, draw a graph for a monopoly, and you'll see that they're mirror images of each other. It's kind of cool. So marginal resource cost is above the supply curve, right? Just like in monopoly, the demand curve is above marginal revenue. So it's kind of an interesting little flip there. Now, in terms of finding how much labor this firm should hire, it's still the resource employment rule. It's still going to be MRC equals MRP, and then we're going to come down, and that is going to be the quantity of labor that they hire. We'll call it equilibrium quantity because they are going to be the market, right? Monopsony, market and firm, same thing. Now, in terms of the wage rate, just like with a monopoly, you can't just go straight over. I can't just do this and say, okay, there's the wage rate, we're done. No. The supply curve dictates what the wage rate is going to be because the supply curve represents the workers. The workers are going to tell you what they're willing to accept. And then you and then basically you decide, okay, like that's going to be the wage. So you have to go down to the supply curve to get the wage rate. And so we're actually going to go from here over to get our wage, and we'll call that EW for the equilibrium wage because the firm is the market. So remember, go down to the supply curve to get your wage, just like you went up to the demand curve in a monopoly to get your product price. One last thing is comparing monopsony with perfect competition. And in doing so, we're going to notice here that the monopsonist hires fewer workers and pays them a lower wage. And that's how they're able to do that. They're like, hey, listen, why don't we restrict the number of workers we hire? We'll pay them less, and that will keep our costs down. An example of a monopsony effectively is the National Football League, or the NFL. Because if you want to be a professional football player, it's basically the NFL or bust. Yes, there's the Canadian League. Yes, there have been some offshoot leagues here or there, but it's basically the NFL. And there's only a select number of people, or players, that play in the NFL. Now, do they pay them a lower wage? Probably not, right? They pay a pretty nice wage. But one could argue that if there was some competition and players could pick what league to go to, maybe they actually end up with a higher wage. Now, if we were to show that on the graph, what we would see here is that, I'll do this in green here, in perfect competition, the amount of labor that gets hired would actually be here at, we'll call this QPC for the perfectly competitive quantity, and then this over here would be the wage. And so you can notice here, we'll call that, wage PC. You can notice here that the wage and the quantity of labor is higher, right? So if we were to apply this to the NFL, we might have more players in the National Football League, and they might make even more money because there's more competition for their services. So just something to think about. In a monopsony, just keep in mind, just like in a monopoly, it's not necessarily that you can't have competitors. It's just that you have so much market power, it's as if you are the only firm in the game. And that's why I basically just tell students it's one firm. So that's all for this video on monopsony. Until next time, have a great day.